guys, this is Dustin Prinz with JamPlay.com, and in this lesson I'm going to demonstrate how muting, dynamics, and percussion can add a completely different element to a rather, plain Jane melody line. So this melody is a basic melody that I use in a song called Let Her Go, and it's pretty cool, but after you're doing several measures of it, it gets a bit repetitive, and I could probably get away with it since the vocal line is on top of it. The guitar line is just supporting the vocal, but I always like to add a bit of a variation to not the melody but the way that I play the melody, so that way it helps the whole progression itself kind of move along, and it builds a point of interest with each changing measure. And for this passage, this is all the progression is. And it repeats this same phrase 4 times. It's kind of a cool little riff, especially when you have the vocal line over the top of it, but that's all it's doing, is it's those notes, that melody, and if I were to not add any sort of element to it, it would just be the same all the way through. And so a way of adding a different element to it and to add interest to it, I guess, is to employ things like muting along the strings. And for this, I'm going to use my right hand outer palm to mute. And so we'll mute the first phrase. That alone already adds a different sound to it. It's staccato. There's, the strings are not ringing out. So the first measure through, I mute it completely like that. And when you add in a vocal, it's like, if you don't love her, then leave her, there's no time to kill. You're making her hold on until you know what to feel. It makes room for the vocal. And the next measure that I'm going to do is I'm going to open up that muting a little bit. And you're going to notice how the strings have, I'm letting them ring a little bit more. They've got more sustain. And so that's adding a different texture to the second measure. So the first measure, once again, is all on muting. There's no time to kill. Slight open. You hear I'm letting a little bit more sustain in there. The ring or the strings are ringing out a little bit more on that second measure. Measure 3, I add percussion in. Measure 4, I pretty much go 4 to the floor percussion. And for this, you don't have to worry as much about muting with your left hand. For this particular riff, I like to have some of that even ringing in because the chord works for us in the context of this song. So I'm going to go from the beginning again. I'm actually going to sing along with it and just play so you can kind of hear the difference of just adding different techniques to the same melody line to create a gradual dynamic or a swell. And it works good for this particular passage because this is right before a chorus, so it helps build up intensity to that chorus. So if you don't love her, then leave her, there's no time to kill. You're making her hold on until you know what to feel. You know the answer, so speak and be fulfilled. It hurts to let go, but once it's gone, you might sit still. So as you can tell, that to some degree it might even trick the general audience in listening. They might think that the melody line is changing, from first measure all the way to the last measure. And the melody line is not changing. Once again, it's all in the way that you play that same melody. Muting. slightly open percussion. So we got muting, a slight open mute, the percussion is introduced, and then we kind of go up with a 4 to the floor version of the percussion. So each one of those measures is changing each time to help build a dynamic all the way through. Now what I'm going to do is demonstrate to you how to play the chord progression as well as how to add the elements in, so that way you guys can put this into a context and it'll make it easier for you to add different elements to your chord progressions as well, so you can add some interest. So our first chord, let's see here, it's a B. I had to think myself. So my pointer finger is on the 2nd fret of the A string, followed by its 5th, which is the 4th of the D, and then my pinky is on the 4th of the G string. So that's our first chord. And the first phrase of that chord is, all we're doing is just playing the A, D, G. Now what we're going to do for the next shape or the next chord is our pointer finger is going to drop down to the D string, 2nd fret, and my ring finger is going to go to the 4th fret of the A string. That's all we're doing. So first chord to second chord. Now I gotta process the next part myself. Right, so first chord, next chord, we're going to pretty well slide from this position with our pointer finger to the 3rd position, or to the 4th fret of the D string, and our middle finger will come up here on the 5th of the A, right? So that's the chord that we're looking at. And that's the pattern within that chord. So chord 1 with phrase 1, chord 2, 3. Alright, and here's the last phrase or last chord. I'll do that one more time. So all of it together. One chord at a time, as well as each phrase at a time. One more time I'm going to go through it, and I'm going to say time about 6 more times if that's so cool with you. All right. So first chord, B. Right? Second chord, we are taking our pointer finger and we are placing it on the 2nd fret of the D, and our ring finger is going to go on the 4th of the A. Right? That's chord 2. Chord 3, phrase. Last chord with its phrase. So all of the phrases and all of the chords together. And without those elements of texture being added to each measure, that's all that thing would have to offer. It's very simple. It's just alternate picking, all open. But the whole point of this lesson was to show you how you can play the same melody line differently. You don't have to change the notes, you just change the way in which you're picking them or muting. So we're going to go through the progression I just showed you, and we're going to add those elements to it again. So muting. And that's all coming from right here, the outer palm of your hand. I'm just literally resting it on the strings. Now, the second measure, it's a slight open, and what I mean by that is I kind of just release a little bit of the pressure on the strings and I just slightly hover over them. So you can hear how there's a bit more sustain to the notes. They're not so staccato. Measure 3, I introduce a percussive element, so yet again it steps it another dynamic up. Measure 4, I add even more to it. I add an element of 4 to the floor to it. All right, guys, I hope that helped you with creating different elements to make a point of interest and to give your rather simple progression somewhat of a point of interest. So let's move on to our next lesson.